In this marketing podcast, we interview digital innovators on their logistical approach to modern marketing tactics and creative strategies to accelerate their company to new levels.
In today's episode of Rise, Grind, Repeat, we're going to be talking to Christy Siefkin. Christy, I'm so excited to have this conversation. Ultimately, you're a great communicator. Lots of digging I've been researching, and ultimately what I love is just the communication, your background in psychology on, what is the psychographics or the psychology of communication. But the reason why I love it is ultimately we're a marketing agency, and I think a lot of people think marketing is just blasting out messages, but to me it's how do we help brands communicate the right message to the right audience that ultimately drives business results. So, before we get into the nitty gritty and tips and all that, I would love to learn more about your background, why communication, and ultimately what's your story of kind of getting to where you are today.
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. And you are a great communicator. I know we were chit-chatting quite a bit before this started, but the fact that your company sees the value in it is huge because every organization, every individual now is expected to be their own brand. Mm-hmm. And how you communicate, especially whether it's on a stage, in a boardroom, on a podcast, through videos, makes an impression and builds trust. So you're on the right path for valuing that. I don't have to tell you that. You guys know that with your successes. In answer to your question about my start, I was not always a strong communicator. I was not always a confident communicator. In fact, I was a pretty shy kid. I was very, very quiet, very introverted. I was the kid coloring in the closed cabinets. I'd hide in the cabinets in our house. Always stayed kind of close to my parents, didn't stray far from them. And I remember in kindergarten, a turning point for me. It's often those early memories that really stick with you. Mm-hmm. And I was a huge Wizard of Oz fan growing up. And in kindergarten, the teacher announced, we're going to do a play. It's going to be Wizard of Oz. And specifically, Dorothy was always my favorite character. I knew all her lines, all her songs. So, of course, I wanted to be Dorothy in this play. So I practiced the songs. I practiced my skipping down the yellow brick road. My mom had a little Dorothy costume that she'd made me. And the day comes in class to raise your hand, who wants to try out for various roles. And when they came and said, who wants to try out for the Wicked Witch, who wants to try out for the Tin Man? They said, who wants to try out for a Munchkin? And I raised my hand for that. And even though I was 5 or 6 at the time, I had this moment of fear surrounding what I really wanted to do because I was afraid to be judged, afraid to put myself out there. And so I picked the thing that was in the background. I picked the Munchkin instead of picking Dorothy. Yep. And it might sound like a silly story, but more I talk to people and a lot of clients, we often have a moment where we realized our self-limiting beliefs or our doubts were keeping us not only from just going for our goals, but specifically from putting ourselves out there to communicate. Because it's nerve-wracking for most people. Public speaking is a huge fear for many. Being in high-stakes conversations where you don't want to offend somebody, you want to make sure that you're being liked, you're not being judged. It keeps us from communicating well, and sometimes we just stay quiet entirely. So I do think of that as planting the seed of realizing. As a 6-year-old, I didn't really realize it, but later could reflect that I knew unless I pushed myself to become more comfortable that I'd miss out on good things in life. That being a good communicator, being able to speak well was going to open doors for me. So I kept pushing and pushing over time, pushing myself to do the speech and debate team auditions with my hand shaking when I was in high school, and later on was in an a cappella group at Duke. This is before a cappella was cool, but still was really fun. And then discovered that communicating really was transformative. It was my passion. So while I had an undergrad degree in psychology, I noticed that I was applying the psychology to communicate. First in a nonprofit setting, and then eventually as I decided to go back to grad school and full-time pursue it for journalism, I started to integrate that into my career as well. So I went from nonprofit space, became a spokesperson for a few different nonprofit organizations, got to do media interviews where I was the person being interviewed, but I thought, how cool would it be to be the journalist that gets to ask the hard-hitting questions, the hat that you get to wear today? And that led me to the path of pursuing the master's, starting a television career in San Francisco, coming here to Phoenix to continue my career, and then throughout that span also getting to work with some networks, get to do work for Discovery Channel, for Animal Planet, for Extra, and then eventually deciding this has been fulfilling, but I want to use all my skills to teach others all that I've learned. And that's what led me to launch my business.
That's amazing. And before we get into that business, I mean, you brought up so many great points. I mean, there's two things. One, I'm a big proponent of perfect is the enemy of great. And how much does fear prevent greatness from happening? Ultimately, that fear, how many, I mean, you work with a lot of executives, high-powered business people.
Right.
I mean, how many people do you start working with that it's like, you have such great ideas and no one knows about it? Think of the impact you can make on the world if you just communicated those ideas in the right way that picks up traction. So, I mean, how much do you think the fear of communicating prevents, progress and, really change in the world? Because to your point, I think I read somewhere that the fear of public speaking is actually greater than the fear of death.
For many it is, yes. And you brought up such a good point there's a great quote from Lee Iacocca that I'm not going to say verbatim, but it essentially speaks to what you said, that you can have the world's best ideas, but if you can't communicate them in a way people understand, your idea is worthless. And it's so true. And that's why what you do for your clients and businesses is vital. It's why what I do provides a service as well. To your point, I talk to executives all the time that at first they're afraid to admit they have the fear because it is an admission of what they feel is weakness, even though it shouldn't be. We're not taught to communicate well. In school, we're taught to write an essay. As we continue into more advanced education, we learn to write perhaps a white paper, a case study, a business plan. The way that we write and write successfully is completely different than the way that we speak successfully, and writing for the ear opposed to writing for the eye. So people are not prepared to be good verbal communicators unless, even if you have a natural gift for it, it takes practice and frameworks and strategy. So first of all, people will be afraid to tell me they have the fear. Then eventually, as we build trust, that does emerge. And then there's a lot of shame around it and fear of, when I do this, if I don't do it perfectly, will I lose the adoration of or trust of my team members, of the people I lead? Am I going to be seen as someone who was faking it this whole time because I can't explain myself well? And that to me is tragic. But whether we like it or not, how people come across when they speak, when they present, informs what we think about their intelligence, their trustworthiness. I mean, this has been studied extensively at Princeton and NYU. So part of my goal in working with, whether it's an executive or even someone who's earlier in the career, is to get them the confidence to know you have the genius, you have the unique perspective, you have a special lens that nobody else has on your subject, on your topic. Let me help you to package it in a way and deliver it in a way that's authentic to you and resonates with your audience.
Absolutely love it. And I mean, going from that big career change, I mean, a lot of people might question it. You had all eyes on you. I mean, on the news, on E! And all this. It's and we'll get into, what your business is, but that statement that you made, going from that to basically all eyes on me to how can I put eyes on someone else and get eyes on them? I mean, that is a very selfless move. I mean, what was the thing that got you to go from, I'm done with the limelight, I want to go help others be in the limelight? I mean, what was that process or journey that you went through to go from here to there?
I got into journalism because I love research, I love writing, I love people, and I love storytelling. TV was just a byproduct of it. I've told people many times that if I could have done radio, I would have been happy to do that too. It wasn't even the being in the limelight piece that attracted me, but I've always enjoyed packaging stories and information in a way that has an impact. And so I did that. I got to do it a lot as a hard news reporter and feature reporter in different markets. And as I advanced in my career, funny enough, I feel like I got farther and farther away from what drew me to journalism, because the more that you climb the ranks and become an anchor position within television, which is a wonderful position, it's an esteemed position, you're no longer on a daily basis meeting new people, researching new topics, getting to have that interaction. So I really missed that. I really craved it. And the schedule of a TV newscaster is tough. You work the opposite hours of the rest of the world.
Yep.
You either are getting up at 1:45 in the morning to go to a morning shift, or you're working till 11 or 12 at night. So I was even finding that schedule was keeping me from even volunteering to help people in the way that I wanted. And my family is not entirely educators, but we have a long line of them. My aunt was a kindergarten teacher. My dad was a professor at the doctorate level.
Wow.
My aunt, different aunt, was also a teacher. So I think it's also in my blood to want to educate others and see them soar, help them get their wings. That for me is ultimately fulfilling. And I discovered that as a reporter, when I would tell a story for an organization, for an individual that changed their life in somehow. It brought awareness about their cause. It helped drive change within the community. It helped to bring attention to something that people didn't know about. That's what made me get up in the morning. It wasn't I'm on TV and people are going to know my name. That's never what fueled me. So as soon as I found out I can get that hit, the adrenaline for me is seeing somebody say, Christy, I landed the TED Talk, or Christy, I got the promotion at work because of what you taught me, or I never had the confidence to speak back to my boss who didn't treat me very well. And now I know how to do it in a way that is calm and authoritative and I'm taken seriously. That's why I do what I do.
It's the fulfillment. It's
Yes.
it's so amazing. So many people get lost in the got eyes on me, the money part of it,
Yes.
rather than like what gets you up at night. There's so much more
Yes.
happiness if you go down that route that leads to all the other things. That if you do that successfully, there is PR, there is news that can come your way. It might not be as big as all that, but at the end of the day, you're going to bed happy. You're waking up hungry. I mean, it's amazing.
And I feel that from you as well, Justin, how excited you are talking about your business and watching you do this. It's what keeps you going, because being an entrepreneur is hard. There's no line.
Yep.
And we all have our moments where it's, why didn't I stick with that stable thing where someone else was sending me a paycheck, but I don't regret for a second having pursued this, because it is so tremendously fulfilling. It really is.
It really is. And I mean, we share similarities on that front of the fulfillment that comes from it. Because ultimately, I'm a true believer that if we can help our clients, brands communicate better, their solution to the world's problems, we're going to help people find each other, drive growth, and it can ultimately change family trees. And that's ultimately, we just want to help brands communicate better so that we can bring abundance for, clients, employees, and all that. But it truly does. Good communication can drive results that creates the abundance that can change lives. And just seeing that process in real time is just so amazing and exciting to watch. But I think we do share that similarity where you're just helping someone have such a great idea, and helping them communicate it better gives them the opportunity to share, their bright idea that other people's lives can change through it. And you're literally impacting, it's a ripple effect of how many different people's lives are changing just through your skill set and communicating.
Ditto to all of that.
And I'm sure everyone's wondering, okay, well, what do you do? Would love to. All right, what is your business, and what is it that you do?
It's easy to remember my business name because it's my name. Although if you don't know my name, maybe it's not easy to remember. But my name's Christy Siefken, as you mentioned earlier. My business is Christy Siefken Communications. But my methodology, that is the core of all that I do, is the go-to speaker method. So using all of my background as a journalist, as an international spokesperson, as someone who trains speakers in the nonprofit space, I teach executives and teams to craft sticky and memorable messaging and then deliver it in a way that makes people want to act. That can be in a boardroom, on a stage, in front of a podcast microphone, or in front of a video camera. So I'm a trainer and a coach is the simple way to put it, but it's an end-to-end process from developing your unique perspective, discovering your unique expertise within your field, crafting messaging that brings your unique perspective to your audience, also with the audience in mind of what they need to know and want to know, and then using that to craft whatever your communication is. So for some individuals, they'll work with me. They do have, let's say, a keynote speech in front of 1,000 people at a conference, and they it's not just presentation nerves. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to incorporate storytelling. They don't know how to make sure the audience pays attention. We address all of that in that context. For others, they have founded a company and they're on a road show. They're doing TV news interviews. They're doing podcast interviews. So I work with them to create the messaging and teaching them also what happens in this media setting. You're a friendly, positive host, but not all journalists are. Members of the media have agendas. I've lived in that space. So how do you navigate when a story is going off the rails? How do you take control of an interview and make sure that the narrative is what you want to be out there? How do you influence the questions that a reporter asks? And a lot of organizations also come to me to train individuals to be ambassadors for their company. Because every person, including in your office right here, when they go home tonight, when they're at line in Trader Joe's or they're at a party this weekend, when a stranger asks them about your business, what they say and how they say it has that ripple effect that you brought up earlier. It can dilute your brand or it can strengthen it. So I also teach teams to make sure everyone in their organization is consistently speaking about the company, helping them developing not just the communications, but how they deliver it and how they respond. Because many people think of communications as I am speaking or I am writing. They completely neglect the other side of the table. And this is where the psychology comes in. And I love tapping into that background. How do you play into human motivation? How do you play into what drives us? How do you play into what studies have shown stays memorable to make sure that when you're communicating, it's a conversation, always a conversation, even when you're doing something like a speech that might seem one-sided.
It's amazing. It's heard in a podcast recently that the most interesting person anywhere is the one that's asking questions and listening. And so many people say it's me talking that is the most interesting. It's people feel like they have to be the one talking in order to communicate. But I think so many people don't value the listening part. And if you can regurgitate and say, it basically shows someone that you're listening. It shows that you care. And then once you make that relatable, their listening goes up quite a bit. And to me, it's funny because that's how we understand if our message is resonating based off of the data.
Right.
And to me, the data is how we're listening. It's like, I said this.
Yes.
This didn't work well. This one, the data is great. This message is resonating. So let's keep building on that. But it's to me, communicating, a big part of it is understanding who your audience is and listening to what's being said so you can have a conversation.
What you've just shared about the audience is so key. I often will meet with a client and they say, well, here are the things I want to say in my speech, in my interview, in my Zoom meeting. And I stop them and say, who are you talking to? And let's do an analysis of them. In your world, it is the avatar or the buyer persona, but that exists in any communication. And we often make the mistake of making the communication about us. I just finished with the client earlier today. We wrapped up the session starting to create content for a short speech that he's going to deliver. And I said, what is it you want your audience to know? He started talking about why this was an important speech for him to give, why it was part of his legacy, why it was part of the impact he wanted to have. And I stopped him and said, tell me in this little description where your audience comes in, because this is all about you. Not in a rude way, but why should I care? You always have to ask that question before you dive into any communication at all. I meaning the audience member. So that's an interesting parallel I think that we see between what I do and you do is making your content, your speech, your campaigns, all of it needs to be audience centric and using the feedback like you said. For you, it's the metrics of did something land. For me, we use real time, everything from micro expressions to the types of questions that you're getting from people to determine if your message is landing. And it's a process that takes time. I tell people early on in their journey, I create frameworks with you or for you, depending on how you engage my services. But this isn't going to be the end of it. This is a living, breathing thing. And as you continue to get new expertise, you get more insights, you get to know your topic, your subject matter better, what you're going to communicate and how you communicate continue to shift.
Yep. It's amazing how many people don't think of that audience, and it's like, oh, well, that doesn't matter. But then you take a step back and, hey, you have a new job. How you communicate that to your grandma, to your wife, to your husband, to your kid, to a friend, to a new acquaintance, you're going to say the same thing, but a little bit differently based off of that relationship. And ultimately, those little nuances of the words, the word choice, and all of that really make a difference. And I'd love to. I mean, we do a lot of A/B testing, and it's amazing how one little word can make a difference. Would love to hear an example of maybe the most fulfilling or the most exciting time when someone had something super exciting, just saying the wrong thing and ultimately going through your process, and just by cleaning up a few words and all these things that ultimately allow them to deliver a message that gave them the results that they were looking for.
Yeah. This isn't specifically a word shift, but a shift in communications that is near and dear to my heart. I think it falls into what you're talking about. I had a client that had been in the marketing space, and I believe was an English major. This individual was not in the STEM space, but wanted to get into STEM really badly and had limited experience doing research, having the credentials that he needed to get the types of jobs that he wanted. Before we had met each other, he had interviewed for all of these jobs within big companies in Silicon Valley and was consistently turned down because his resume didn't reflect that he had the experience. What we did was work together on his thought leadership, on his messaging, and on his storytelling to be able to show companies that through storytelling that he had all the skills and had unique skills in terms of not the tactical skills, but the problem-solving skills, the creativity skills, the ability to work in teams. And he not only got one offer after that, but started to get multiple job offers at the companies that he wanted to work for. And he even got the feedback as he asked these companies, what is it that worked this time? What was different? Once he got the job offers, he could say, hey, this wasn't working before. What was it? And they said, we could tell that you had the ability to be a leader. So this is where leadership and communications are so closely tied. Companies are, yes, looking for people who are gifted in their craft, tactically speaking, are really good. But what's the difference between somebody that stays in that technical operational role their whole life versus becomes a leader? It is their ability to have trust in those that they speak to, be able to communicate a vision, be able to guide people through difficult times by being a good communicator. So when you demonstrate that, independent of your field, you are immediately much more valuable than someone who has the technical skills alone.
That is amazing. Yeah. I mean, and again, just helping. And that just goes back to show that you understand this, the role in it. It makes that relatable. I mean, it understands that, hey, you're listening. You understand what this role needs and the requirements are, and help them communicate the path to, getting that job.
Yeah.
Storytelling has been brought up several times, and I love it because
it's at the core of everything we do.
Absolutely, and I give my thoughts, but I'd love to hear why is storytelling so important? What are the impacts of it, and what are the outcomes that can come from it when you do it successfully?
The psychology nerd in me is going to start with the science of it.
I love it. I love the psychology. I love it so much.
Yes, I tell people many times when I went back to grad school, I was going to do journalism or get a PsyD. So in the world of psychology, a PhD is research focused, a PsyD is clinically focused. And I knew if I wanted to pursue journalism, it's a young people's industry. I mean, you're on the go, it's crazy hours. I figured I'll do this now. I'll get the PsyD at some point. But until I get there to get that, I try to incorporate it in all I do. Storytelling, there's been all sorts of research around the way that storytelling impacts our brain. So fMRI studies have been done of people's brains, looking at how their brains react when they are given strictly data and information versus a story. When we are fed data and information in one of those PowerPoints or videos or speeches that puts us to sleep, it activates two areas of our brain, Broca's region and Wernicke's region. And both of these are responsible for language processing. That's it. You're hearing the words, your brain is maybe internalizing them. They're trying to understand them. Doesn't mean you'll remember it. When individuals tell a compelling story, they wrap the information within a story. As many as 8 areas of our brain light up in these studies. And it also involves your sensory cortex and your motor cortex. So when we're told a good story, feel as if we are the character experiencing it. It's the reason when you watch that scene from Titanic, this stands out to me as a good example, where the water's rising and Jack and Rose are getting pushed down the hallway and they're trying to unlock the gate and the key drops and then someone comes to help them, but then they drop the key and the water's rising. You're saying, oh my gosh, are they going to die? Are they going to drown? You're sitting there on the edge of your seat wondering, will they live? Because you're pulled into the story. And it's why we get the sweaty palms where our heart starts racing. Good stories tap into not only light up those regions of our brain, but cause the release of different chemicals. So we get a surge of dopamine when we're in these stressful situations. And dopamine is like a Post-it note. We remember something when we have a reaction to it. So a cliffhanger moment, if I'm telling a story to you about the very first time that I was at a SWAT raid, and I start describing that it was early in the morning. Our news van pulled up. I could see the SWAT team in the distance. They weren't really moving. All I could see is these protesters were starting to bang trash can lids, and they started to kind of march down the street. The SWAT team started to come a little closer, and suddenly I heard crack, crack, crack. What are you wondering now?
What's crack, crack, crack? What happened?
Exactly. So I've got you on the edge of your seat wondering, Christy, what was that crack, crack, crack? Was it gunfire? Was it fireworks? Was it tear gas that was being deployed? And that's a story for another day. But when you set someone up to wonder what happens next, it seals it in your brain. So storytelling causes that to happen when we storytell and share our vulnerabilities, which also is so key to be a successful leader in today's climate. That's when we get the release of oxytocin or the love drug, the bonding drug. And it's what makes us feel closer to somebody, not just in a romantic way and not just between mother and child or father and child, but in a way that we feel like we can relate to them. So for leaders, to really succeed in today's culture, they need not just the authority, right? You need to be someone who people can trust and say, I know Dustin's going to make a good decision. I trust him. But there needs to be authenticity. There needs to be the relatability. And that's developed over time and largely through telling stories of yourself, of the people you've worked with, of the hard times you've had that you've recovered from. And that's why I'm always transparent with clients in these interviews with anyone I speak to about the bumps in my journey, because I think there's a lot of fake in social media. There's a lot of people that are experts, whether it's in communications or whatever their field is, that create this narrative of perfection. And it's just these 10 easy steps and you will land where I did by following these things. It's just a lie.
Yeah.
Nobody's story is that. There is no overnight success. And I try to, as I coach people and teach them to use storytelling within their communications, share my own failures and struggles through story so that people know, okay, I'm on the path. Christy was on this path too before she got to a good place. And I'm still learning. I still have those bumps on the road.
It's relatable. I mean, so many people want that relatability. I mean, that's what it does. And I think everyone can, after hearing that, go, okay, that makes total sense. I think the next, kind of action is, well, how do I craft a great story? So do you have any tips on how people should go about? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the hero's journey and all these different frameworks, but I guess what are some tips that you have on, all right, if I have something I want to communicate, how can I turn this into a story? Knowing that what you just mentioned, the brain literally opens up when storytelling happens. So how can people kind of craft their story in a way that allows their audience to keep their brain open and remember them?
To your point, there are so many different approaches, whether it is the hero's journey. I mean, there's stories from mythology applied to the way that we communicate. But I think one of the easiest ways to get started with storytelling is to go back to our earlier discussion point. Start with your audience. Your audience is going to be the hero in your story. So find out as much as you can about your audience. What is it that is their major pain point? What motivates them? Where can you be of most help to them? Where can you add value? As much as you can find out about your audience and figure out what character they represent. And it's hard to draw a broad stroke, but you can create kind of a 30,000-foot view of who is this audience. Then look for stories within your personal life, within the clients that you've worked with, within partners that you've worked with, to find a story that demonstrates the point that you're trying to make. The mistake many people make in storytelling is trying to tell the story before they figure out what the point is they want to make. So start at the end. Start at the end with the point of this story is no matter how many times you fail at public speaking, you will have learned something from that experience to make you better for the next time. I need to figure out, for example, that's the point of my story. Then I'm going to go back in time and pluck some of my own stories, my own public speaking failures. I'm going to share some stories about clients I've worked with that had impressive resumes or big titles that crashed and burned. And I'm going to share those as a way to connect to my audience who I know is thinking, perhaps I can't do this, or it doesn't, if I didn't get it right the second time, Christy, this just isn't going to land. So the likable hero is your audience. Tell a story that has to do with them. Make it clear what the challenge is. There has to be some crisis and tension within every story. So share that within the stories that you have. What is the resolution? And the resolution doesn't have to be a happy ending. Some of the most powerful stories we tell are tales of woe, for lack of a better phrase. You think of the original fairy tales, Brothers Grimm, Hans Christian Andersen. These stories were horrible. They're not the Disney version. It's somebody gets raped or dies or gets blinded, and they were cautionary tales, but there was a lesson within it. Yep. So whether you have a happy resolution or a not so happy resolution, you then land your message at the end and remind the audience this was the lesson that was learned, so that when they go home and they'll remember those individual stories in a week, in a month, in a year, they'll be able to remember why you were telling them the story.
Totally makes sense. And I'd almost wonder if kind of the bad outcome is more of a teaching, path to go down rather than the happy ending. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it really depends on who your audience is. And in a corporate setting, how much the corporation allows that type of narrative. And I only say that because I've worked with some pretty large companies that have their values include, we do not speak of things in the negative. It is all positive. I think there's a bit of a mistake there in all transparency. I think that we can't see the light without the darkness. It's the contrast that teaches us lessons. But know your audience best. Maybe you start with the message and the tale being a positive one, being an inspiring one. And if you're trying to motivate them to action and that's not working, that's maybe when you make the tweak and you start delivering maybe some of those tales where things did not go well. That may put the fire under somebody to change their behavior. And it depends on the context. If I'm giving a motivational speech to individuals on stage, the stories that I tell, I'll share some stories of hard times of my own or others, but the stories that I finish with and the stories that I leave as the final memory, this goes back to primacy and recency effect. We remember best what's first and last. They're going to be uplifting. I'm going to want to finish on a high note, on an inspirational note. If I am an executive and there is a situation that's extremely urgent and there is no time for people to be inspired, we've got to get this done last week and the stakes are extremely high, my stories are going to tie into, here are the 3 to 5 bad outcomes if we don't act on this now. And it's not being negative. It's just being realistic and knowing what the moment calls for and tweaking your tone accordingly.
Totally makes sense. And I'm sure, audiences, Christy, this is great. I can tell a story, know whether it's good ending, bad ending, whatever it may be. I go to start. The big question is, does the story change based off the medium that I'm telling it, whether it's in person, whether it's on Facebook ads, whether it's on the website, whether it's one-to-one like this, whether it's a podcast? Does the story change, or are there nuances based off the medium in which you're telling that story?
I love that question. Nobody's asked me that. Truly, you don't want to change the story in terms of having the facts change.
Touche.
And I say that jokingly, but it also... our culture is, we live in a time where we need to legitimately be concerned about this. As the term #fake news exists, you want to know that the people that are speaking to you are trustworthy. So never invent your story, never embellish your story to the point that it's not the truth. I'll put that out there first. As you look at different mediums for communicating your story, the more time you have, the more detail you can get into. It sounds like common sense, but where people get lost is, say you and I were doing a 10-minute podcast today instead, and I want to go into the story of, well, I was born on a Wednesday, and it was a full moon, and my mom was wearing green pants. I mean, people do end up getting into that level of detail, and by the time they get to the end of their presentation where there's the call to action, you need to motivate somebody, their audience has tuned out, and you've missed the opportunity to seize somebody. So the short answer to that is, the shorter amount of time you have to speak, the more succinct you have to be. I think in general, the more succinct you can be, the better. Even if you have an entire hour for a speech, whoever got angry at going to a conference and the speaker had an hour but went for 30 minutes or went for 40 minutes?
Yeah.
Nobody, because you're going to get an extra cup of coffee. Maybe you'll have an interesting conversation with that speaker afterward. Maybe there's going to be some interesting Q&A afterward. If you can be respectful of people's time and speak as succinctly as possible, that's great. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of video. I think it is the best tool for storytelling possible, because you have multiple modalities. You have the words that are being spoken themselves, the way that they're being spoken, your facial expressions, and all of the micro expressions that we're not even conscious to the fact that we're interpreting, and then the gesturing that goes with it. You have all those tools in your belt to pull somebody in and take them into the story with you. If you are simply writing an article, believe me, I love the written form. I think it's very powerful, but you have to be all the more colorful and descriptive when your only tool is writing. The more tools that you have, and it increases from written to written plus audio to written plus audio plus visual, the more that you can pack in there, because you are given the opportunity to hit people from multiple angles.
Yep. Totally makes sense. Such great information.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I know we talked a little about, I wanted to throw out, if you're game to talk about it, the idea of thought leadership. Do you guys bounce this idea around at all here?
I mean, not as much as we should, but this is a path I'm trying to go down.
Yes.
and do more thought leadership myself. We're working, bigger businesses and stuff like that, where they have, great leaders. And so we're trying to push it on clients. And so kind of selfishly would love to kind of see where you want to go with it.
It's really just information for you.
I love it.
It isn't. It's so that you and I can chit chat about it and then share it with others. I bring it up because it ties into what we've been talking about. And just as you look at your metrics for your companies, I collect data all the time from the clients I work with. And it really informs where I do a deeper dive in developing my IP. And when I develop a new program or I develop a new module in what I teach. And the consistent theme that I have seen in small businesses, large businesses, entrepreneur life, people want to create a brand through what they say. Hard stop. Not to say you can't create it through your fonts, through your colors, through written articles, but the expectation now, given this visual medium culture we live in, is that you can say something interesting, that you have interesting commentary, and that you can do it well. And most people aren't armed with those skills. We're not taught those skills. So I always tell people, if they're looking to get started to strengthen their brand in today's culture, I think being a thought leader through speaking is one of the best things you can do, because you get opportunities on podcasts, you have opportunities to sit on panels, give a speech, be somebody who does even a little lunch and learn event in terms of people learning about what you stand for and your brand. It is, in my opinion, the best way to have that authentic connection and to get people to buy in to whatever your company or brand is.
That totally makes sense. And I mean, that's kind of the path that we're going on is
Yeah.
how can we do more talking that ultimately gives us
Yes.
more opportunity, and then we can bring the video in, then we can,
Yeah.
and I'm just a big fan of all three forms of communication. The how can we package it up, get the video, get the audio,
Yes.
transcribe it, get the written word. And so the mouthpiece is essentially the thing that leads, that creates the opportunity
Yes.
to do the rest then, it seems like.
Yes. And there is an unfair expectation for today's leaders that they are dynamic presenters and dynamic presenters in front of the camera, which is funny to me because especially if you are a younger leader up and coming, yeah, you've had exposure to that. You grew up on your phone. You've been doing this your whole life. But for those who didn't grow up on TikTok or on Instagram Live every day, it's a lot harder. And I've had people confidentially share, I feel like I can't compete, Christy. I feel like I'm becoming irrelevant because I don't have the ability to create a compelling video, to communicate dynamically in this digital space. And you probably received the same feedback from people that you work with.
Absolutely. I mean, that's usually the biggest pushback is, oh, I love it, but as soon as I see that red light, and then I'm afraid that I'm going to say one wrong word. And no matter how much you try and say, well, we can clean things up in post, we can do all these things, it's still that fear that, you alluded to earlier in the show that prevents that communication from happening. Wanted to ask, when we were bringing up the video and whatnot, how do you help, executives, leaders, and all that, where it is so, alpha dominant, like I can't be wrong, and ultimately, how do you get them into a place where they're very uncomfortable to then do it and do it well?
I think to become successful long term, it's all about taking small steps that are comfortable. I'm never going to meet someone and then within 10 minutes say, let's have you audition for me, give me a speech, I'm going to record this, and I'm going to show it to your senior leadership team to get feedback. Because immediately somebody is out the door. I start with, I want you to go home and record a video talking to me about something you're passionate about. It could be coaching your kid's soccer team. It could be that you're learning to cook French cuisine. It could be a backpacking trip that you took 3 months ago. And I can learn so much about people and their communication style and their challenges by letting them just speak naturally and comfortably about something that isn't all business. We start there, and I get people comfortable with talking about things that are easy, things that come naturally. And then we use that as a teaching opportunity to talk about things that are more uncomfortable. Talk about subjects that are going to cause people in your audience to get upset. Talk about complex information that your audience might not understand, and how do you distill it in a way that people can understand? And repetition is such a key part of it. It is holding yourself accountable, whether it's if you have a professional like myself who works with you, creating a schedule where you cook into your schedule. I'm going to dedicate 10 minutes at the start of every day or the end of every day to practice speaking into my webcam, my iPhone, or speaking to my husband, wife, my kids to get that comfort. And it's through that, as you become more comfortable, that I drizzle in all of the tactics and technique. Because if you do a big knowledge dump up front, it's overwhelming for people. And people start to think, I've been doing this wrong the whole time. There's no hope for me.
Yeah.
So I try to sneak, just how parents, you have little ones, so you understand this. If your kids don't want to eat vegetables, you don't put a whole plate of steamed broccoli in front of them and say, eat up. You start with maybe one piece of broccoli and you're going to drizzle a little bit of ketchup or some cheese over it and sneak it in and make it palatable until maybe they start to taste a little bit more broccoli and they can tolerate it. I take the same approach to people becoming more confident communicators. It's baby steps, it's getting in the reps, and it's constantly getting feedback, not just from your coach, but from yourself. There's no better way to look at what you need to work on than to watch a recording of yourself. And it is painful to this day. I mean, I've done television for over 15 years. I still don't like to watch myself. And I still find things I want to change and that are hard. But I've gotten better and better by working with professionals and by watching myself and saying, hey, I would have liked to say this differently, or how could I have showed up more confidently here or there? It's just like watching game day tape. For anybody that plays
Love
a
it.
sport, it's the only way that you get better.
Absolutely. I mean, that's core of everything. It's having the willingness that this isn't going to happen overnight, so you have to put in the reps. It takes consistency. It takes feedback, critical critical feedback that might not be
Yes.
fun, but it's if you really want to get to this destination, it's part of the journey, and you're there just to help get them through the journey much
Exactly.
quicker, better, less painful, and ultimately
Yes.
once they get to the destination, it's that destination is a lot more fruitful than how they try to do it themselves.
Yep.
And that is amazing. I mean, you're helping so many people out, and it is communicating and ultimately can help other people. There's a lot that you said that has helped me out, that is
good.
no doubt helping the audience out. Love to kind of shift gears, and everyone talks 5-year plans, 10-year plans. COVID obviously can throw a wrench, and anything can happen overnight. So I like to try and not focus too much on big grandiose plans. What are you looking to accomplish within your business or personally in the next 6 months?
Next 6 months.
6
Oh
to
my
12
goodness.
months. Yeah. What are you
What am
doing
I
on now?
right now?
Yeah.
Part of my business is professional speaking. So I don't just do the coaching and the training. I also do professional keynote speaking as well as emceeing. And it's something I had the chance to do while I was a broadcaster, because you're brought in to work with organizations, or I always volunteered to work with nonprofits because it's my background. That's where I started my career. And so that is something that I am now getting the chance to build up more proactively and getting the chance to travel more to do. So in addition to taking care of the individuals that I coach and the teams, I'll be getting to do a lot more of that speaking, not just for nonprofits, but for professional organizations and to leadership teams. So that's very exciting for me. I love to write research, the things that made me a journalist. So when I get to create my presentations, when I get to create my speeches, I am in a state of flow where all time is lost. I feel so happy. I can miss 2 or 3 meals of the entire day. The dog's pawing at my leg and saying, "Mom, let me out, let me out." So I'm very much enjoying doing that and looking forward to that. While most of my programs I teach in person as well as virtually, but it is all directly to the individual intensive coaching. I've realized that to really reach more people longer term, I need to have an online product. So that is part of what I'm developing as well now, is my curriculum for those maybe who don't have the time or potentially don't have the budget to work privately with me one-on-one, to go through my go-to speaker program in that digital capacity.
Absolutely.
And at their own pace. If you want to watch the video 4 a.m, you can, and then I'll still have the opportunity to coach more sporadically with those people, but I'm able to serve more people through a broader audience. I'm also doing a lot more work with clients globally, which is very exciting. Case in point, some clients in Southeast Asia who I work with, and particularly for women who are communicating in a professional setting. The culture informs so much of how they communicate, what is acceptable within the context of that culture or that country. And when a lot of these individuals come to speak to Western audiences, they have to completely relearn the way that they show up. I mean, this is independent of gender. People coming to speak, maybe English is not their first language. I bow down to anyone who presents well in their native language, let alone speaking in a different language. I know a tiny bit of Spanish, but I would do a terrible job if I had to go present in Spanish to a Spanish-speaking audience. So it's helping people who are English not as a primary language, and helping people who culturally need to adjust to the Western ways of communicating when their upbringing in their country has been much different. And that's the beauty of living in the world we do, that we can coach people on Zoom, on Teams, on WebEx. And I joke with friends that part of the draw of starting my business was to have more normal hours. You know this, an entrepreneur, you just work, you work 24 hours
there
instead.
Are no hours.
There are no hours, but it's, when I used to be in a studio with no windows at nighttime, now I'm in my home office and hopping on a session with someone at 6 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night who's in Singapore, that they're waking up and it's their morning. And so it just feels so different when the choice is for you to get to do it that way.
Yep.
But that's on the horizon. And then just personally, part of the reason I launched my business too was to get a lot more involved in the community and have a schedule where I could choose to do that. So I sit on the board for a couple different organizations locally. I'm very passionate about health-related causes, animal-related causes, education. And I've got I can't talk about it yet, but I've got some projects around the corner connected to those that I'm very excited about.
Well, it sounds like we're going to have a part 2, and it
I would
sounds
love
like you
that.
got a couple irons in the fire. You are literally the what this podcast is about, rise, grind, repeat. I mean, you're doing a lot. You're doing a lot of things that fulfill. I mean, the smile on your face as you're talking about
Thank you.
it lights the brain up. I greatly appreciate your time coming
Of
in here, and
course.
before, I'm sure there's people itching to how do I reach out? How do I find you?
Yes.
Before that, we've talked a lot of tips, a lot of things to help people communicate better. What's the one thing that you could say if someone's trying to just craft their message, communicate better, either individually or for their organization? What is that tip that you have for them that they can take away and start executing on today?
We all learned this in our youth. Keep it simple, stupid.
I've
And
been hearing that a lot
I
lately.
hate to phrase it that way, but I'll just say keep it simple. And I use the metaphor of speaking to your grandma or your next door neighbor's kid who's 9 years old. This is not an insult to your grandma or the next door's neighbor's kid, okay? Grandma is busy with all of her retirement activities. She may not have a pulse on what's going on in your industry. The 9-year-old is distracted with playing sports, hanging out with their friends, being on their video games. How do you communicate a message simply and clearly so that anybody can understand it? That applies in any form of spoken communication. So when you create that first version of a message and it has 4 clauses in it, and it has industry jargon, and it has so many words that you lose your breath partway through saying it, you need to simplify. And then go back and simplify again. Be ruthless. The fewer words that you can use to communicate even a complex idea, the better. People will understand it, and as a result, people will remember it.
I am so guilty at that jargon and
We
all
all
that.
are. We all are. Do not feel bad.
So no doubt I'm going to be reaching out, and I'm sure there's tons of people that, my message just keeps missing.
Yeah.
I'd love your help. How can people reach out to you, Christy?
I am on all the social platforms, Christy Siefkin, and it'll be, I'm sure, in the show notes, the spelling of it. It's Siefkin. There's very few Siefkins, so you'll find me right away. My company is Christy Siefkin Communications. My website is my name. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not on TikTok. Maybe in the future, we'll see, but you can reach out to me through any of those channels, and I'd love to help you wherever you're at.
Awesome. Thanks again so much for coming in. This is
Thank
great.
you. Thank you for having me. It was a blast.